Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 15th of November 2021. The articles which we are going to cover today have been displayed on the screen, and let us now begin the discussion.
Coal face down is right, says Minister. And so a day after the 26th Conference of Parties in Glasgow ended on Saturday, Union Environment Minister Bhupender Yadav, in a personal blog, dwelt on India's last-minute intervention that played a key role in the final text of the agreement that called for coal to be phased down rather than phased out. Now, this is just one of the takeaways of Glasgow Conference of Parties. There were various other takeaways related to mitigation, carbon markets, financing, plurilateral agreements to which India was not a party, and various measures related to adaptation. Now, there is no need for me to substantiate over here as to how the Conference of Parties to UNFCCC is important or relevant both for prelims as well as for mains examination. As far as mains examination is concerned, it can be mapped directly to GS Paper 1 Environment and also GS Paper 3 Environment. As far as prelims is concerned, direct questions with respect to the key decisions made at Glasgow Summit could be asked. And so in this regard, we are going to look into the important takeaways one by one. So as we have discussed in QIP lectures and DNS, the main task for COP26 was to finalize the rules and procedures for the implementation of Paris Agreement. Most of these rules had been finalized by 2018. But a few provisions, like the one relating to creation of new carbon markets, has remained unresolved. However, due to clear evidence of worsening of climate crisis in the 6 years since the Paris climate deal was finalized, host country United Kingdom was very keen and adamant to ensure that Glasgow Summit, instead of becoming merely a procedural conference of party, was turning point in enhancing climate actions. And so we could see clear-cut emphasis from developed countries to get some substantial kind of outcome, which is clearly reflected in the multiple decisions which were taken, which is quite unlike the last summit which was held in Madrid in 2019. We know in 2020 there was no summit because of COVID pandemic. And hence more than 100 heads of states and governments were invited to attend the meeting, and they lent their political weight behind the process. It will be interesting for you to know that so many leaders have assembled on only two earlier occasions. At climate meeting in Copenhagen, where the developed countries agreed to provide $100 billion per annum financial support to the developing countries for adaptation and mitigation measures, and in 2015, where the Paris climate deal was finalized. And so this is only the third instance where most of the countries which matter for the climate change, have gathered. And so let us understand what they have decided to come up with as far as various aspects of climate action is concerned, starting with the most important, mitigation. So if you don't understand clearly what mitigation is, you have to correlate the increasing amount of greenhouse gases concentration in the atmosphere with that of rising temperature. That is a matter of another discussion, but for now, you should take me for granted that there are now increasingly clearer evidences to support that higher the concentration of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the higher will be the anthropogenic induced global warming. And so, as there is a direct link between global average temperatures and concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the key for the solution to the climate change problem rests in decreasing the amount of emissions released into the atmosphere and in reducing the current concentration of carbon dioxide by enhancing the sinks. So, you can clearly understand that mitigation has two components. The first one is about reducing the amount of carbon dioxide which is being released into the atmosphere, which basically means by getting rid of fossil fuels, coal-based energy systems, increasing the energy efficiency. And then the second way is by removing the amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases which are already there into the atmosphere. You can do that by increasing the amount of forest cover or the green cover on the surface of the earth, or you can deploy various carbon capture technologies. Not many of them are commercially available, but they are under research and development phase. But these are the two ways through which mitigation occurs. And so you can say that mitigation along with adaptation are the two key ways through which we are going to fight the climate change. And so Paris Climate Deal has laid very special emphasis on mitigation. If you look into nationally determined contributions of most countries, mitigation is around 70% of their commitment. The Glasgow Summit asked all the countries to strengthen their 2030 climate plans or nationally determined contributions by next year. So you know that first set of NDCs was submitted in 2015-16, and it was agreed in the Paris Climate Deal that next set of NDCs will be higher. So if I have committed 100 gigawatts of renewable energy in my first NDC, I'm going to increase it by at least 1.5 times. And so it is expected of all the countries to significantly strengthen their commitments to the nationally determined contributions. You cannot just stick to the earlier targets. You have to increase successively your targets. That is how you are going to fight climate change actively. So this has been the first takeaway. The second takeaway, or combination of two takeaways, is that they have decided to annually convene a meeting of ministers to raise ambition of 2030 climate actions. Because there was no mechanism which existed under Paris Climate Deal where the ministers would meet yearly on an annual basis to talk about their mitigation measures. And now it has been decided that the ministers are going to meet annually. And along with that, an annual synthesis report will be submitted about how much they are doing in that particular year. Then the third deals with the phasing down of the coal. And now here an important role has been played by India, because originally developed country wanted to include a language which would talk about the phase out of coal. But we know, and we have discussed in the DNS, how crucially dependent India is on coal for its energy needs. And so India insisted that instead of phase out, we should talk about phasing down of coal. And so this is the first time that the coal has been explicitly mentioned in any conference of party decision. But again, India has agreed on fossil fuel phase out, which is about petroleum. But as far as coal is concerned, it will be phased down and not phase out. So phase down basically means you have to gradually reduce the amount of consumption, but phased out means that you have to completely remove its use by 2050 or 2060, whatever the date you are committing to. So these are the four important takeaways as far as mitigation is concerned. Now let us try and understand the adaptation. And oftentimes students get confused between mitigation and adaptation. So we have understood that mitigation is about reducing the amount of carbon dioxide which is being emitted into the atmosphere, or its active removal. But we know that some sort of global warming, at least 1.1 degrees Celsius, has already taken place. And it will be at least 100 years before which the impact of climate mitigation is visible, because the residence time of most of the active greenhouse gases is around 100 years or more, except for methane, which is much less. But most of the greenhouse gases once emitted stay into the atmosphere for at least 100 to 200 years. And so when some sort of climate change and global warming has already taken place, which means that this global warming is going to impact our agriculture, it is going to impact our lifestyles, it is going to impact our industrial processes, it is going to impact our infrastructure. We have already seen how the frequency and intensity of disasters has increased, for example, the cyclones, glacial lake outbursts, floods. And so since so much of change has already taken place, we need to adapt according to the new realities, and this is known as adaptation. And so just like mitigation, adaptation is a very, very important part of climate action. And Paris Climate Deal has a separate article dedicated to adaptation measures. And so, very correctly, most of the countries, especially the smaller and poorer ones, and the small island states, consider adaptation to be the most important component of the climate action. These countries, due to their lower capacities, are already facing the worst impacts of climate change and require immediate money, technology, and capacity building for their adaptation activities. And we have seen how developed countries had earlier agreed to provide finance, technology, and capacity building support to these underdeveloped countries who are actually facing the brunt of climate change. It has also been mentioned under the Paris Climate Deal. And so the final decision of the Glasgow has asked the developed countries to at least double the money being provided for the adaptation by 2025 from the 2019 level. In 2019, about $15 billion was made available for the adaptation. That was less than 20% of the total climate finance flows. Whereas developing countries have been demanding that at least half of the all climate finance should be directed towards adaptation efforts. And so under Glasgow, it has been decided that that amount should be at least doubled to $30 billion by 2025. Apart from that, Glasgow has created a 2-year work program to define a global goal on adaptation. So we know that the Paris climate has a goal on mitigation to reduce greenhouse gas emission deep enough to keep the temperature rise within 2 degrees Celsius of pre-industrial times. And so you can see that a similar global goal on adaptation has been missing primarily because of the difficulty in defining such a target. Unlike mitigation effort that brings global benefits, the benefit from adaptation are local or regional. And this is not very difficult to understand why benefits from adaptation measures will be local or regional, because it is about enhancing your infrastructure to be able to face the brunt of climate change. And so, for example, if a country receives funds to safeguard their airport against flooding or to safeguard their police stations against cyclones, and so the benefit will be reaped only by that country, unlike mitigation measures where if any country reduces the amount of carbon dioxide which is emitted into the atmosphere, the benefits shall be reaped by everyone. And so specifically because of these reasons, there are no uniform global criteria against which adaptation targets can be set and measured. However, this has been a long pending demand of developing countries to define such a goal, which has been done under the Glasgow Summit. The 2-year work program will come up with global targets and measures which all the countries will have to include in their national plans. And so after having covered mitigation and adaptation, let us now talk about 2 of the issues on which there seems to be some sort of a headway, which is about carbon markets or the rules governing the carbon markets and financing. So under the Paris Climate Deal, under the Article 6, market mechanisms have been provided in order to facilitate the carbon markets, where the carbon emission reductions have been envisioned as some sort of commodity, just like your shares, which can be traded or exchanged. And so if there is a country which has promised a lot but was not able to meet its target, can purchase the carbon credits from another country which has done much more than what it promised. So the carbon markets facilitate the trading of emission reductions. Such a market allows countries to earn carbon credits for the emission reduction they make in excess of their targets. These carbon credits can be traded to the highest bidder in the exchange of money, and the buyer of the carbon credit can show the emission reduction as their own and use them to meet their own nationally determined contributions. And so it is a win-win situation for both the countries. The country A, which was not able to meet the target, will be able to meet the target, whereas the country B, which invested a lot in climate change, will be able to get the funds for further investment. And so it is a win-win situation. And more often than not, the country which have invested the most in the climate action are developing countries. And the countries which need to update their targets are the developed countries. Now, the continuing problem always has been that of transitioning from the earlier Kyoto era to the Paris Climate Deal. So a carbon market existed under Kyoto Protocol but is no longer there because the protocol itself has expired last year. Now the countries like India and China took a lot of action and gained a lot of carbon credits under Kyoto Protocol, which then expired. And now these developing countries had been demanding that whatever carbon credits they had earned under the Kyoto should be allowed to be transitioned under Paris, and the developed countries should be bound to purchase them first. The developed countries, on the other hand, argued that the carbon emission reduction which these countries have persisted or pursued in last 20 years is not credible, their accounting is quite vague and it's not transparent, and so we are not going to buy those carbon credits. Rather, we are going to buy the carbon credits which are fresh under the Paris Climate Deal. The Glasgow Pact has offered some reprieve to the developing nations. It has allowed these carbon credits to be used in meeting countries' first nationally determined contribution targets. These cannot be used for meeting targets in the subsequent NDCs. That means, if a developed country wants to buy these credits to meet its own emission reduction targets, it can do so until 2025 and not beyond that. And so the countries like India and China and Brazil have at least 4 years where they can sell their earlier Kyoto era carbon credits. And this resolution of deadlock over carbon markets represents one of the major successes of Conference of Party 26 at Glasgow. Last major takeaway under Glasgow has been the financing. Every climate action has financial implications, we all know that. You want to enhance the energy efficiency, you need money, you need technology. It is now estimated that trillions of dollars are required every year to fund all the actions necessary to achieve the climate targets. But money has been in short supply. Developed countries are under an obligation due to their historical responsibilities in emitting greenhouse gases to provide finance and technology to the developing nations to help them deal with the climate change. And we have seen in 2009 in Copenhagen, the developed countries had promised to mobilize $100 billion, and we have already seen that at Copenhagen. In 2009, developed countries committed $100 billion per year of climate fund so that the adaptation and mitigation measures in the developing countries could be funded. And this promise was also reaffirmed at Paris Climate Deal, which also asked the developed countries to scale up this amount from 2025. Now, this was to be achieved by 2020, but the funding is nowhere in the sight. And so this was also a major sticking point. And so the Glasgow summit and the agreement has expressed deep regrets over the failure of the developed countries to deliver on their $100 billion promise. It has asked them to arrange this money urgently and in every year until 2025. It has initiated discussion on setting the new target for climate finance, which will be beyond $100 billion per annum. And it has asked the developed countries to provide transparent information about the money they plan to provide. And so it's just not about the funding. It's also about an obligation on behalf of the developed countries to provide transparently how they are going to raise that money, how much they have already raised, and how much they are willing to contribute the very next year. Now, apart from these 4 major pillars, there were 2 very important plurilateral agreements to which India was not a party or signatory, but they are worth mentioning. And the most important is an agreement among 100 countries to cut methane emission by 30% by 2030. India is not a part of this group, but methane is a significant greenhouse gas with a much higher temperature forcing quality than carbon, 28 to 34 times more, but stays in atmosphere for a much shorter duration. And so we can understand that cutting methane emissions, which is generated mainly by livestock, is certainly useful, but there is much bigger methane emergency around the corner as the Earth's permafrost areas in Siberia, Greenland and Arctic littoral begin to melt due to global warming that has already taken place and will continue to take place in the coming years. There are warnings that as the permafrost melts, huge volumes of carbon and methane would be generated by the plant and animal material that has been trapped under the ice, and hence the emergency for agreement on methane. Then another group of 100 countries have agreed to begin to reverse deforestation by 2030. Since the group includes Brazil and Indonesia, which have large areas of forest that are being ravaged by legal and illegal logging, there is a hope that there will be progress in expanding one of the most important carbon sinks on the planet. However, an important thing to be highlighted over here is that Brazil has subsequently clarified that its commitment only applies to illegal logging, Whereas the logging which has been sanctioned and approved by the Brazilian government will have no impact and it will not be covered under this commitment. So now you can understand that after quite a long time, especially after Paris climate deal, this is a very significant moment in climate action. There seems to be quite a headway in a lot of frameworks as far as they were agreed under Paris climate deal. But still, it remains to be seen how far the countries, especially the developed countries, come true on the promises they have made on financing, and how far the countries walk their talk as far as carbon markets are concerned. As and when they appear in the newspaper, we will keep on discussing them. Let us now move on to the next article. Creating Safe Digital Spaces appears on page number 7, where the authors talk about the importance of digital platforms which are free of cyberbullying. Now, because of COVID-19 lockdown, an estimated 71 million children in India start accessing the internet for their school studies. And this has led to unprecedented rise in unsupervised screen time for children and young people. This has had various problems like cyberbullying and online child sexual exploitation by adults. And so the discussion which we are going to have now will be mainly centered around cyberbullying, but most of the takeaways will be applicable for online child sexual predation or exploitation also. And so we are going to first understand what cyberbullying is. We are also going to watch a movie where we will understand the full spectrum of cyberbullying, its effect or impact on a child, what are the challenges which are faced in order to tackle cyberbullying, and how can we tackle this problem. And so if we talk about generally, the name itself gives away the definition. It is a bullying that takes place over digital devices like cell phones, computers, and tablets. Although it can also occur through SMS, texts, apps, and online social media forums, or in fact in online gaming platforms as well. Cyberbullying includes sending, posting, or sharing negative, harmful, false, or mean content about someone else. Cyberbullying has a unique concern in the sense that it can be persistent, as digital devices offer an ability to immediately and continuously communicate 24 hours a day. And hence it can be very difficult for a child experiencing cyberbullying to find a relief. It can be permanent in the sense that most of the information communicated electronically is permanent and public, if not reported and removed. And it is very hard to notice because teachers and parents may not overhear or see cyberbullying taking place, and hence it is very hard to recognize. Now, bullying is not new. What is new is cyberbullying. And so it is important for us to understand the difference between traditional bullying and cyberbullying. So the traditional bullying, which usually happens in school or in public spaces, is face-to-face, whereas cyberbullying is anonymous. Traditional bullying happens in schoolyards, but cyberbullying can happen at school or home, basically everywhere. Traditional bullying generally happens during the day, but it can happen 24/7, 365 days a year. In a scenario where there is no internet, a child usually faces very safe at home. But if someone has decided to bully a child, that child cannot run away from it. In traditional bullying, the childs are well identified and they can be found and hence punished. Whereas in cyberbullying, it's very difficult to find people in digital spaces. The traditional bullying has a very small audience, limited to 10 to 20 people at max. Whereas in this case, the audience is much wider. It is a worldwide audience. And just so that you can understand the full dimension of cyberbullying, we will watch a small animated movie where you will understand the full spectrum of cyberbullying. Starting with the first form, which is exclusion. And exclusion can happen in a multiple number of ways. A child could be excluded from online activity. Number 2 is harassment, comprising of abusive or threatening messages sent to a child. Number 3 is outing, which is all about publicly posting embarrassing or threatening information related to a child, and especially without the consent of the parents or the child himself or herself. 4 is cyber stalking, in which the attackers harass the victim through online communications like email, social media, for example Instagram, Snapchat and WhatsApp. The 5th form is frapping, which is when someone logs into a child's social media account and impersonates them, posting inappropriate content in their name. And you have to remember that once something is posted on social media or internet, it might never be gone from there, even if deleted from your own account. Sixth is fake profiles, which can be created by someone to hide their real identity with the intention of cyberbullying. Seventh is dissing, which is all about sending or posting cruel information about the child online. And this is especially done to damage a child's reputation or their friend circle. It also includes posting damaging photos, screenshots, and videos online. Eighth is trickery, which involves gaining your child's trust so that the secrets can be shared publicly online, where a cyberbully will befriend a child, leading them into a false sense of security before sending their private information to others. Ninth is trolling, which basically means deliberately provoking a response through the use of insults on online forums and social media sites. A troll will personally attack a child, aiming to make them angry and provoke a response. And final, catfishing, which involves stealing online identities and recreating social networking profiles for deceptive purposes. So now it is not very difficult for you to think of the impact or effects which cyberbullying can have on young people. The first and foremost is that it leads to humiliation. Because cyberbullying occurs in cyberspace, online bullying feels permanent. Kids know that once something is out there, it will always be out there. They can feel exposed, embarrassed, and overwhelmed. It also leads to isolation because cyberbullying sometimes causes kids to be excluded and ostracized at school. Consequently, they often feel alone and isolated. When cyberbullying occurs, parents sometimes recommend shutting off the computer or turning off the cell phone. But for many kids, using these devices is considered the most important way they communicate with others. It leads to anger because many victims of cyberbullying would get angry about what is happening to them, how to respond to such a situation. Some kids that are victimized may even plot revenge and engage in retaliation, which then further deteriorates the situation. It also somewhat leads them to think that they are powerless. Victims of cyberbullying often find it difficult to feel safe. They may feel vulnerable and powerless. Typically, these feelings surface because the online bullying can invade their home through a computer or cell phone at any time of the day. And so all these together lead to sleep deprivation, high tension and anxiety, compromised appetite, and loss of reception and absorption. And ultimately, it not only impacts the academic life of a student or a child, but it also hampers her physical development. And so, when cyberbullying is such a concern in today's digital world, why are we not able to tackle it properly? Because there are a lot of challenges. And number one challenge is lack of empathy on behalf of the bully. Most of the bullies which have been surveyed denied that they have bullied anyone. They believe that making fun of a classmate is not bullying. And hence, unless and until we are able to sensitize school children and seniors about their digital action and their impact on their classmates and juniors, we will not be able to get rid of the problem. The second important aspect is lack of awareness, not just on the victim, but also on their parents. Most of the parents do not consider cyberbullying as something real. Then there is a problem of juvenile. Since most of the bullying act is committed by juveniles, on the juveniles, they are likely to be charged under Juvenile Justice Act, where there is almost no punishment. And since the act itself is digital, it's very hard to trace and pinpoint a perpetrator of a crime. He or she could be physically located in the same jurisdiction, or he or she could be located across the ocean in some other continent as well. And so these are the challenges of cyberbullying which do not exist with the traditional bullying. So what can we do about it? How can we tackle the cyberbullying menace? Of course, there are legal provisions. For example, Section 507 of IPC and Section 66E of IT Act provides some kind of relief. The details about them have been given in the notes. but there are other measures which need to be taken, and the first and foremost is about awareness creation. Parents need to understand that it is very, very important for their child to be aware about bullying. What is bullying? If they are facing bullying, they should log off from their social media. The person who is bullying them should be blocked, and immediate alarm should be raised to the right authorities. Then, parents should exercise complete control and monitoring of the social media activity of their children. There have been guidelines which have been released by NCERT and CBSE with respect to how to use social media and about digital etiquettes. Parents need to monitor and control digital signatures of their children in order to be able to raise alarm earlier. Parents need to make sure that their kid is just not always devoted to social media and digital platforms, but also continues with the real life engagement, so that they are not devoid of friends and social circle in the real world. So as such, this might seem like a tangential topic to UPSC syllabus, but if you focus on the syllabus under GS paper 3, under cybersecurity, this forms an important part. Also, it can be very, very important in GS paper 4 and essay. Let us now move on to the next discussion. A routine matter or a punishment post. According to the author, it is time for the central government to clear the doubts being raised about the collegium's recommendations. And so again, the functioning and the working of collegium system has come into question. Because of recent Supreme Court's collegium's recommendation to transfer the Chief Justice of Madras High Court to Meghalaya High Court, as well as senior most judge of Allahabad High Court, who was transferred to Madras High Court. And these transfers have raised a lot of eyebrows. Now if you look into the syllabus of GS paper 2, structure, organization and functioning of executive and judiciary is a part of your syllabus. And one of the important ways through which an organization can function efficiently is the way appointments are made. And especially in case of judiciary, the way people are appointed is crucial for determining the independence of judiciary. And so in this regard, we are going to understand the constitutional provision, the genesis of 3 judges case which lies in Keshwanand Bharti case, what challenges collegium system faces, and what is the way forward. Let us now begin the discussion. Now, whenever we talk about judicial and higher judicial appointments or appointment to these constitutional posts, why are we so worried about these appointments? Now, we are worried about these appointments because the way these judges are appointed decides the independence of the judiciary. Now, if you've gone through even the most basic of the text of NCERT, you know the Constitution of India has taken a great care to ensure the independence of judiciary. Let us know in the comment section what are some of the provisions through which the Constitution has ensured the independence of judiciary. Now, why is independence of judiciary so important? Now, independence of judiciary, especially in a democracy like India, is very, very important because first and foremost, you need to maintain public confidence in the judiciary. That public confidence will come only when judiciary will be seen as independence. Then, if you want to uphold rule of law, you have to be independent because more often than not, threats to rule of law come from government. And then, if you want to protect individual rights, fundamental rights and liberties, which again are generally threatened by the government and its actions, you will have to be independent. An appointment is one of the ways through which either the independence can be gained or it can be lost if we are talking about judiciary. Because if the appointment procedure is dominated by the government or executive, many people say that judiciary, higher judiciary will also become like another ministry or an attaché of a government. And so that is why the first article which deals with judiciary, higher judiciary, Article 124 also talks about the appointment to the higher judiciary in the Supreme Court. So Article 124 states that President shall make Supreme Court judges appointments after consulting the Chief Justice of India and other Supreme Court and High Court judges as he considers necessary. So the appointment shall be made by the President of India, but it is mandatory for the President to consult the Chief Justice of India for appointment as a Supreme Court judge as well as other Supreme Court and High Court judges as he or she may think fit. Similarly, for the appointment to the High Court, the appointment is again made by President, but in this case, the consultation is done or is mandatory as far as Chief Justice of India is concerned, but then you will have Governor and Chief Justice of High Court concerned. So now you can see that the Constitution has clearly given the power to the President as far as appointment is concerned. But President has to consult Chief Justice of India. So what does this consultation means? And how far the consultation done with the Chief Justice of India is mandatory for the President or the government is what has led to a lot of legal debate. Because Article 74 says that President of India shall act on aid and advice of Council of Ministers. It will be unconstitutional for the President to not act on aid and advice of Council of Ministers. But Article 124 says that the Supreme Court judges will be appointed by the President after consultation with Chief Justice of India. And so here is what you have, the genesis of a problem of appointment to the higher judiciary. So now everyone can see that the collegium system through which the higher judiciary is appointed is nowhere mentioned in the Constitution of India. And so the aspirants, especially those who are in their initial phases of preparation, are often confused as to where this collegium system has come into play. And for that, we will have to go into the history a little bit. I will just take 3 to 4 minutes to explain that. And the genesis of collegium system can be traced back to Keshwanand Bharti case, which was a landmark judgment which was given by a very, very narrow margin of 7:6, where the Supreme Court delivered its historic verdict which established the doctrine of basic structure to the Constitution of India, which basically means principles and values that cannot be altered by any act of legislature or executive. So of course the verdict was not well received by the government of the day, headed by Indira Gandhi, which viewed it as curtailing the power of the parliament and the government. And so of course there was bound to be a retaliation. And so what followed was a series of unprecedented events. On April 26, 1973, one of the judges who dissented in the Keshwanand Bharti case, Justice A.N. Ray, the person who was against the basic structure doctrine, was promoted to the position of Chief Justice of India. But he was not the senior most judge, because so far the tradition was that the senior most judge of the Supreme Court will automatically become the Chief Justice of India. So his elevation was made possible by superseding 3 more senior judges, all those 3 judges who were in the favor of basic structure of the Constitution. This was a blatant attack on judicial independence by the executive. And so from there, what took off as a legal battle has culminated into 3 judges' case. And these 3 judges' cases have subsequently restored the independence of the judiciary as far as appointment process is concerned. We will of course reflect upon the demerits of collegium system, but let's just quickly go through the 3 judges' cases. Before the 3 judges case, in 1974, Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab, Supreme Court held that approval of Chief Justice of India is must in appointing judges of High Court and Supreme Court. Then in 1981, first judges case or SP Gupta case, Supreme Court ruled that the recommendation made by CJI to the President can be refused for cogent reasons, thereby giving greater say to executive. So now you can see it's all about the interpretation of the consultation. So in 1974, Supreme Court says that consultation means mandatory obligation. In 1981, Supreme Court says that consultation is not binding. Then in 1993, in second judge's case, the Supreme Court held that Chief Justice of India only need to consult 2 senior most judges over judicial appointments and transfers. However, an objection raised by executive on appointment, collegium may or may not change their recommendation, which is binding on executive. So now you can see that consultation in second judge's case is now starting to mean boundation. Of course, there is a scope of reconsideration, but after reconsidering, if collegium says the same thing, recommends the same name, executive has to follow it. Then in 1998, under third judge's judgment, the Supreme Court ruled that CJI should consult with 4 senior most Supreme Court judges to form his opinion on judicial appointments and transfers. The recommendation of the Chief Justice of India would be binding on the executive. So the genesis of collegium system can be traced to the second judge's cases, which interpreted the word consultation as concurrence, which was then restated by the third judge's cases. Of course, there were some changes which were made in the way the Chief Justice of India is going to consult the senior most judges, but overall, it has restored the same thing. Now, this became a big problem for the government and the executive, because now they lost almost all the say in the appointment to the higher judiciary. And so to undo that, they came up with National Judicial Appointment Commission and the constitutional amendment, which has again been rejected by the Supreme Court. And so right now the procedure is the same as given in the third judge's case and memorandum of procedure, which was signed a few years ago. So as the things stand today, all the appointments to higher judiciary are being done by a collegium of higher judiciary judges. And there is a lot of problem in that. The problem is just not limited to the constitutionality of the provision, but it also deals with merit, corruption, and nepotism as well. Constitutionality because when the Constituent Assembly debates were going on, the Assembly deliberately rejected the proposal to vest the Chief Justice with the veto power over appointments. And so something which was debated in the Constitutional Assembly and was rejected, how can it later on become the part of our legal system? Then the next set of problem comes from Article 74, as I have alluded initially. Because Article 74 demands the President to act on aid and advice of Council of Ministers. Article 124 says that President is going to consult Chief Justice of India. The collegial system demands the concurrence of the President with or without aid and advice of Council of Ministers. And so this goes against the basic structure, which is the parliamentary democracy, which requires the President to act only and only on aid and advice of Council of Ministers. Now, Council of Ministers may advise against the consultation of CJI, but that doesn't matter. And so according to 214th Law Commission of India, collegium is a clear violation of Article 74. Then comes the issue of undemocratic nature of the collegium system itself. Because of the way collegial system has operated in past 20 years, it has been very non-transparent and closed to outsiders. And no system of checks and balances have existed, which are an essential part of democracy, and especially for appointments to higher judiciary. Of course, since last 2-3 years, Supreme Court has opened up its collegial system a little bit, but not to the extent which is expected of an institution of such a high dignity. Then there have been numerous cases where people with better qualification and better track records have been sidelined to make way for someone less qualified due to seniority. And so there is a case of ruling over of merit over seniority. Then finally, you have uncle judges syndrome. Now these are not my words, but used by Law Commission in its 230th report, which said that nepotism, corruption and personal patronage is prevalent in functioning of the collegium system. Recently, Justice R.M. Lodha made a comment where he said every third High Court judge is an uncle. It is found that within the High Court, relatives are practicing law at the same place. Most of the judges and advocates have blood relation between them. And this is a very serious issue as far as the independence of higher judiciary is concerned. But it's not like higher judiciary has not taken any step. Supreme Court has made way for proceedings of collegium system to be kept in public domain. And this was very correct move and very welcome move. It was an obligation and a moral obligation on higher judiciary to do so. Especially after it struck down the NJAC judgment, it basically became incumbent upon the higher judiciary to do so. Then of course the proactive disclosure by judiciary is in sync with the Right to Information Act as well. Now as far as openness as a value of GS paper 4 is concerned, it not only means openness in the functioning of the executive arm of the state, but also in the judicial apparatus, including judicial appointments and transfers. And finally, the right to know of the citizens. The step strengthens democratic process and fundamental rights of freedom of speech as the right to know as an inherent part of the Constitution, which the secretive collegium system directly violates. So these are the steps which the judiciary has taken, which is very welcome. But now what can be the future course of action? So the first step would be legalizing the collegium system by the government. Law Commission has already recommended that Parliament should pass a law. Now this law should not be exactly the same as the collegium system being followed. It should have an element of transparency, but at the same time, it should ensure primacy of the judiciary in the judicial appointment. Then this new system should ensure independence, accommodate the federal concept of diversity, demonstrate professional competence and integrity. It should also have strict criteria for appointment as a judge of higher judiciary. Eligibility criteria to judge the performance and suitability must be formulated objectively and must be made public. So these are some of the recommendations which will go a long way in ensuring that not only the judiciary is independent, but also the continuous struggle which is going on between judiciary and executive can be put to an end. Let us now move on to the next article. Deliveries of S400 systems have begun appears on page number 1. And so ahead of Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to India early next month, Moscow has started delivery of S400 air defense systems to India. S400 is known as Russia's most advanced long-range surface-to-air missile defense system. The missile system integrates a multifunctional radar, autonomous detection and targeting systems, anti-aircraft missile systems, launchers and command and control center. So it is all in one mechanism. S400 layer defense system can intercept all types of aerial targets including aircrafts, unmanned aerial vehicles or UAVs, and ballistic and cruise missiles up to a range of 400 km at an altitude of up to 30 km. It can track 100 airborne targets, including superfighters such as American-built F-35, and it can engage 6 of them simultaneously. It is especially suited to take down strategic aerial platforms like bombers, mid-air refuelers, reconnaissance aircraft, and advanced early warning and control systems. It is capable of firing 3 types of missiles to create a layered defense. The S-400 defense system has been deployed in Syria in 2015 to guard Russian and Syrian naval and air assets. Russia has also stationed S-400 units in Crimea to strengthen its position in the annexed peninsula. Gadchiroli encounter, a severe blow to Maoist network. So the encounter in Gadchiroli, in which 26 members of outlawed Communist Party of India, including key fugitive Milind Teltumde, were neutralized, and it is considered to be the most severe blow to Naxals in recent times. Now in this regard, we already understand that Naxalism or left-wing extremism is a very important part of the syllabus, and hence it has already been discussed in our DNS. In DNS dated 3rd February 2021, we had this very detailed discussion where we took 2 previous year questions, understood what Naxalism is, what is the ideology which works behind the Naxals, what has been the main causes of Naxalism, and in the same DNS we also discussed what is the government's approach, how the government is trying to tackle the problem of Naxalism. So it is highly advised that you go through the DNS to understand the full perspective of the problem.